You're going to hear from today have all been working in partnership with Voice 21 to develop practice for Oracy in their schools and settings in the region. And we're going to hear today a little bit from them about how they've gone about that, and just have them share some effective practice with us. And then we'll have some time at the end for anything that you want to ask, any questions about either working with Voice 21 or just about generally what's been going on with Oracy in their schools. My name's Jasmine Walsh. I'm working alongside the schools with Voice 21. My email is on the screen there. So if you're interested after this meeting in finding out a little bit more about Oracy provision and what we can offer this academic year or next academic year, please do feel free to drop me an email. So like I said, I'm going to slightly tweak with this agenda here. So we were going to start with Christ the King. We're going to start with Grange Town first, and then hopefully Joe from Christ the King will be able to join us. So without wasting any more of your time, I'm going to hand you over to Grange Town, if I can just get their slides. When you're ready.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So I'm Hannah Grogan from Grangetown Primary. I'm a Year 6 teacher, but also the literacy lead.
I'm Lucy O'Connell-Beach, so I am the Year 4 teacher and I'm the Welsh lead.
Moving on from there. So our school is a 2-form entry from reception to Year 6. We are in a really diverse area in Cardiff that has a really high level of EAL children, as well as free school meal children, and yeah, we have a lot of challenges within most of our classrooms. We've got 9% on the ALN register at the moment, with an additional 30% receiving additional school intervention. So we knew that for our school, Oracy was so valuable, and it was going to be something that was really going to help us moving forward. Next slide, please.
So following on from what Hannah said, this is why we decided, what we needed to do to support our learners. So one thing that we really needed to do was to develop the vocabulary. We needed to work on the structure of their language. Even our children who have good vocabulary and are really confident with that, sometimes when they're speaking, and then that links to their writing as well, their sentences just don't make sense. So we really needed to focus on that as well. The retention of learning, so we were finding that they were learning vocabulary but then forgetting it quite quickly. We needed to develop their confidence in speaking, especially when it came to sort of the presentational oracy and using, a clear voice and not looking at the ground when they're talking. So that's something lots of my children definitely do. And we knew that really in order to improve their writing, their oracy skills had to be improved first. So we thought that it would sort of go hand in hand. And next slide, please.
Yep. So the way we started was that we, as a staff, we looked at introducing one strand of the Voice 21 strands one at a time, and introduce that to staff, and that was really useful because it just allowed staff to become really familiar with Voice 21. It allowed everyone to kind of understand what the expectation was for each of the different strands. We started to make staff familiar with terminology, suggesting ideas of how things could be used. Myself and the Oracy champion started trialing things in class, so started thinking about how we could what things worked for our children, what things were particularly useful. We did a learning walk just to establish a benchmark for our school. And then because originally when we started this, we had a bit more of a maths focus, we had a little look at our proficiencies as we started kind of using the maths 5 proficiencies more through our school, and we saw that Voice 21 lent itself so naturally to that. So myself and the maths lead started working together to try and see if we could embed the two and make sure that Oracy was really central through maths.
So we did a little few things and we trialled these. The first thing that Hannah trialled was talk assemblies, where we were having year groups together and trialling those in the hall. Sometimes they were a little bit chaotic, but we trialled it. Well, I say me, Hannah trialled it in lots of different ways, and it was really interesting. I think what we wanted really was for them to, have an opportunity to talk in assemblies rather than just listen to the person delivering them. So we wanted to try that, and also it's a great opportunity for other year groups to be role models and for the other children with the Oracy as well. We've also looked at different talk groupings. We've shared that with members of staff to get them a bit more familiar, and then myself and Hannah have been looking at those as well in our class. We've looked at sentence stems to structure lesson talk. So I know Hannah met with the maths lead and they come up with maths Oracy stems that could be used throughout the school to show progression. We promoted the strands and sort of picked out what Oracy we were hoping to develop. So we really thought about what our school needed and what we were going to do in order to improve that. And we wanted to encourage the children to do the thinking and become more independent in their learning rather than us sort of feeding everything to them. Next slide, please.
So a lot of what we trialled came through the lessons that we were trying to deliver. So when we were approaching lessons, it was thinking about how we can make the children more independent and taking a bit more ownership of what they were learning and how they were learning. So, for example, I gave my children a graph. So we were looking at the polar regions, and we had a little look at what we could learn from the graph. So before we did anything on temperature or anything about looking at the specific temperature in the environment, they just had the graph, and it blew their mind that the graph was upside down, first of all. But as we went through them, we did lots of conversation using our sentence stems. What did they observe? What could they tell me? What could they learn from the graph? So before we even started using it, there was so much Oracy and so much language that had just come out from using one simple picture. Next slide, please. And again, another thing that we trialled in the lesson was just encouraging children to use the vocabulary really explicitly that we'd been learning. So what was wrong with the food chain? So we'd been looking at food chains and they had to identify the error. It took them a really long time, but they started to unpick what was wrong, and when they were explaining, then they were using that correct vocabulary and expressing that much more clearly. Next slide, please.
So this is a little RSE lesson I carried out in year 4. So we were looking at different scenarios, as you can see on the slide. And then instead of just, going off and discussing it think per share, we had a real think about how we could use our talk groupings to look at this. And I also introduced talk tokens as well then to get the discussion going in groups and to sort of make sure that everyone in the group was being heard and everyone was having a chance to not only practice their Oracy but also practice the speaking part of Oracy and the listening part of Oracy as well, because that's something that my children need to work on. And I wanted to introduce them as well to we're doing jigsaw Oracy lesson, we're thinking about social situations, so we're going to be using our social and more emotional Oracy because we're thinking and talking about how people are feeling.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, through maths, so obviously for us initially, this maths was a really big focus, and one thing that I was trying to look at with my class again was trying to get them to really think about being more independent. So I trialed something called Learn It, Try It, Prove It. So I gave them the information in the Learn It section, which they had to work with a partner to discuss what was happening, what they felt the rules were, how they thought that was supposed to work. And then they tried it to try and apply their rule, so to see did their rule work. And if their rule didn't work, it was about going back to the Learn It then and rediscussing it with a partner, and then the Prove It at the bottom. So they were just showing, okay, well, now I know I've tried it, I know it works, I can now prove whether my reasons behind something. So it's that explanation. And this worked really well with my class, just as a really nice introduction to algebra. We started looking at that as a really simple point of starting, and they did really, really well. Next slide, please. So another one, so fed in facts. So that's something that was on the Voice 21 training a lot with bits of information. But when we started looking through maths, we found some really lovely maths cards that just was kind of like wordless maths, and getting them to think about what's happening just by adding little bits of information each time, which was really lovely. So we've used some of those through our maths as well, just to get the children to start exploring what they know, what they can see, what they're talking about before even getting to questions. Next, please. Again, so we did another lesson about classifying animals. So we thought about, I gave the children a load of animals and said, how would you sort them? So so we had a little discussion then about that there was different types of animals, fish, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and then they had to sort them and generate their own criteria. Then we watched a video and they had to then go back to their work and think about, based on the new information they had, would they keep them the same, would they change them? And that just allowed the children again to be much more engaged in our lesson and much more kind of inquisitive in what they were doing, because they really had to think about where they'd placed the animals, were they right, why have they justified putting them there. And again, it was a much more successful lesson than me just telling them, which was really useful. Next slide. Again, this was the start to be doing a topic about conflict and resolution. So the first lesson I gave them this, and I just asked them which one was the odd one out. And they looked at the pictures, they tried to work out what was going on, and just from that one little picture, we just started unpicking different types of conflict, why conflict might happen, and kind of the emotions that come from resolution. So it kind of was a nice starting point for our topic.
So here's some things that went well. So we've developed clear explanations of success criteria for using math strategies. The approach in maths allows great opportunity for discussion and collaboration. So it's given us opportunities as well as teachers to really sort of address any misconceptions that might come up when we're hearing the children discussing maths problems and things like that. We've had staff training and staff insets where we've shown staff examples of how we use Voice 21 in our own classrooms and how they might want to think about using it. The sentence stems that were created by Hannah and the maths lead have been really, really useful. And I know lots of staff have said the same. It's a really nice way to get the children to use them in other subjects now as well. And engagement in lessons and retention of information. We are seeing that with these Oracy strands being used and trying to use them across the board, the engagement in lessons is improving with children who might not always be the most confident at speaking or might not always follow the listening ladder.
So the challenges, so one thing which we noticed fairly quickly last year was that the listening skills of our children weren't great, and we needed to really focus on that if we were going to be successful in any type of talk. So we really had a big focus around listening skills. So next slide, please. So through the we set up class discussion guidelines, listening ladders, which were displayed in every classroom, just to make it really explicit to the children that these are our expectations, and very clear from the start. And that's really been beneficial the start of this year now going forward, that those expectations are clear from the beginning, and that's really helped us to kind of establish a good ethos for talk.
So another challenge that we found is that some members of staff are still thinking of Oracy as literacy and not as a separate thing that can be sort of included in lessons across the curriculum. So what we've done in our inset is, when we were given examples of Voice 21 strategies that we'd use in the classroom, was we were trying to give examples of it being used, but not in a literacy lesson, so people can realise that it is a separate thing. It's not reading, writing, Oracy as we used to think of it. And we're hoping then that this sort of improves the use of vocabulary as well across the curriculum.
Yeah, so we've just tried to kind of make a bigger focus of making sure that those guidelines for talk and for listening are really clear. We've tried to make sure that as teachers, we've modelled good examples of Voice 21 and how that can be embedded through lessons. Maths curriculum insets have been delivered to staff, and trying to use Voice 21 language wherever we can. So that might be with staff, it might be with children, but trying to really get that through in everything that we're doing.
And then the impact on practitioners and learners. So staff are definitely more aware of the Voice 21 strands and can talk about them more confidently. Staff are beginning to apply these into their own classroom practice. The children are beginning to apply some of the skills in their talk and beginning to use sort of the sentence stems and recognise the grouping symbols. And children's ability to talk about their learning and their understanding is starting to improve as well.
And this was then during our elevated Oracy classroom practice sessions, where we started putting together our kind of action plan for what we plan to do as a school, which we've now kind of moving forward. These are the things we wanted to do. So on to the next slide. Our next steps is that our school focus for Oracy, we've realised is that actually Oracy is a really valuable tool for us for elevating our learning, that vocabulary and everything. So that's one focus for us. And the learning walks, making sure that what gaps we need to now work on, developing talk tactics, and meeting AOLE leads across the curriculum. So that's everything. I'm sorry, we've tried to whiz through very quickly.
Oh, thank you so much. No, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing so many sort of practical strategies and activities that you've used as well. I know that will be so helpful. And what I'll do is I'll pop all of these slides onto our community area afterwards. So if anybody wants to go back and look at any of those activities that were shared in a bit more detail, then you'll be able to do that, because there were some fab things there. Thank you ever so much. And for raising that really important point as well, that, you know, Oracy is not just for the literacy lessons and the literacy classroom, it really permeates everything. Like you said, just like we want them to read and write in other subjects, you know, we wouldn't imagine trying to teach a history lesson without asking them to read something or write something. So too do we want them to engage in Oracy, and I think you've really made it part of your pedagogy at Grangetown by the sounds of it, which is brilliant and lovely to hear, the positive impact that it's having on pupils as well. Thank you so much. We're going to move swiftly on to Christ the King Catholic Primary School. I think we've got the presenters here. Let me just check.
Yeah.
Hello. Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Fab.
Hi.
Okay, so I'll hand over into the capable hands then of our next school.
Are you going to move the slides for us, Jasmine?
Yeah, you let me know and I'll click it through for you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Joe. I'm Joe Wright from Christ the King, and
I'm Helen Oyston.
So I'm the Oracy lead, and Helen's the Oracy champion. And first of all, thanks very much for Grangetown. It was really interesting hearing what you've been doing, and lots of similarities with us really, and the kind of strategies we've used. And our focus has been on improving discussion. So we've been trying to think about how we can make classroom discussion and particularly kind of exploratory talk stronger. So we've really adopted some Voice 21 strategies. Just quickly, our context: we're we're one form-entry school, we're a Catholic school. We've got a nursery, so we're 3 to 11. 220 children, very low free school meals. So we do have quite sort of high achieving children traditionally, who have sort of done quite well kind of academically. So we wanted to sort of look at how we could extend that and develop pupil independence, because that's been a real focus for us. So if you could click on. So I've sort of touched on this a little bit. I think Helen's just going to say a bit about where we started.
Yeah, so as Joe said, we have got articulate and high achieving children, but we really wanted to look at the consistency and the structured way that we're teaching Oracy. As Grangetown said before, it's thinking that it's not that part of it's not literacy, it's its own entity, and so we wanted to really make sure that we could sort of raise its profile throughout the school, and make sure that teachers knew what we wanted the children to achieve through that Oracy, that it wasn't just a case of, right, off you go, have a chat now, that actually we use this in a structured way, we use it for certain ways, certain sentence stems would work for certain times, and that we wanted more, like Joe said, that exploratory talk rather than just presentational talk. So our ongoing focus is to improve the quality of our classroom discussion using a whole school approach. That consistency is really important to us.
Okay, you could move on for us. So we looked at all of the kind of range of different strategies that we'd been shown over the various kind of training sessions, and talk tactics was the one that kind of jumped out at us. And what we like about talk tactics is it's quite flexible in terms of you can use it really right down at the very youngest children and up to year 6 and beyond. So we've sort of introduced it in a phased way. It really is a kind of a way of structuring discussions. But what's been really powerful with talk tactics, sort of started off with using the instigators and the builders and the challengers, and really sort of thought about when we first used it, it was kind of being quite explicit with the structure of the sentence stems and the talk tactics, but as it's become much more embedded, so I teach year 4, Helen teaches year 6, and as it's become more embedded, it's been much more natural, and I think that's what's really positive about these strategies, that they actually start off being something that you have to sort of teach and use and make really clear, but then it actually becomes very natural, so it's actually used almost without thinking about it a lot of the time, so that's really good. So if you could just click on. So this is just an example which I found that talk tactics really lend themselves to reading comprehension, and they're actually brilliant across the curriculum, but it's just an example there from doing the book The Iron Man. Actually the bigger slide there had some pictures of children doing some talking, but we cut out the faces, but this is just a sort of an example of using a kind of a rich question, and we really have tried to explore. It's also something that we've looked at throughout the curriculum, really, in terms of challenging our more able pupils, but how to use good questioning and how to get children to really unpick their learning through questions. And one thing I think is on the next slide, if you could go on, I will actually go back. We talked about, we've really tried to develop the big questions, which are a Welsh, I think the Welsh Government, it's on Hub. It's a resource that we found really, really powerful on Hub. We had Estin a little while ago, and we were using big questions in a couple of lessons during Estin, and they were really positive about it. So it's a bank of resources. There's a good example there, what's better for learning, teachers or the internet? And that's being discussed in year 5. And it's just a bank of questions which really kind of promote rich discussion, and kind of used in sort of parallel with the talk tactics, we find they really kind of develop the children's thinking. So big questions and talk tactics together have been really powerful for us. So this is something that we were given by Voice 21 when we had our development day last year, by Jess from Voice 21, and she gave us this overview, which we really like and found it useful, is to kind of use the talk tactics in a structured way. So starting off in the early years and then building up to year 6, I mean, you can see it's self-explanatory there, but it's a useful slide. It's a useful tool because it kind of makes clear what you're expecting from each year group. So you've got the range of sentence stems on the right, and then the different kind of types of strategies on the left, and it sort of builds up. And obviously we're early days at the moment, but when this is really embedded, we'd hope that by year 6 they've got the tools that have been sort of built on in the earlier years. So I've talked about this a little bit. So the big questions, there's just that graphic at the top there comes from the, if you search, if anyone hasn't seen it, I'd really recommend it, just search it up on Hub, big questions, and we're trying to match them as much as we can through our curriculum, and we're using, as I've already said, that talk tactics have been used to structure them. I think Helen's going to say a bit about discussion guidelines, which we really like.
Yeah, I think Joe made the point about the fact that it's got to be like an enriched discussion as well. We want to make sure our discussions are really focused, and so that's really important from the younger to the older children. But to do that, obviously, they need to know how to do a good discussion. And we felt that when we were shown the discussion guidelines and the listening ladders by Voice 21, this was absolutely the way we wanted to go and where we wanted to start. So we decided to use our discussion guidelines to improve the quality of exploratory talk. Obviously, dependent on the year group of the child. Children talked about what is discussion, and they decided themselves what they felt created a good discussion. We used 1 or 2 really good videos from Voice 21 as well to help sort of lead the children. So they watched some very good discussion between other children, and then we're able to identify, well, I think this worked well in that discussion, maybe that could be one of our guidelines. So each of our classes put together their own discussion guidelines. So we've got these around the school now, and there is, you know, they're appropriate for each year group, but also as you look at them, the vocabulary changes obviously as they get older, but there is a consistency with those as well. So we've really sort of made that idea of discussion really important for the children. We've raised that profile first, and then I think is the next lovely. So again, listening ladders, same sort of thing as discussion guidelines. We decided that they are also really important, and I think our children always have a lot to say, but maybe most children are like this really, but they just don't listen. There's no listening and taking on how that discussion works, and can I, rather than just saying what I want to say, can I build on what's already been said? So that, again, the listening ladder we felt was a really important place to start. And again, classes have worked on that themselves. Our early years I think they find these sorts of things a bit harder, because they feel, maybe, how are we meant to go about this? So the Voice 21 guidelines that we had, that Joe just previously shown, they were really helpful, because it meant that we could say, well, look, here's a structure, so don't push yourselves, but just start here. And the listening ladder, again, we said, look, you don't need to have 7 steps, you can have 2 steps. You know, so it's really making sure that the classes understand the importance of it, and we're building on it, as Joe has said, we're building on them every year.
Yeah, so there's, oh, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. So that, yeah, those discussion guidelines are just an example of one that we did in class.
So on our next steps here, we put down, we want to monitor it more. That's the last thing on that list there, the learning walks, but listening walks, we're planning to do that in the summer, so we can do that in April when we've got our development day. And we want to really just make sure that all the classes are kind of up to speed and the same kind of strategies, because these are our focus areas. But really, that I think the important thing with Voice 21 is there are so many different tools and strategies that you can try out, and actually listening to Grangetown talking about things like talk tokens has kind of rang a bell with me, and thinking, oh yeah, actually that I remember seeing that on the training and thinking that would work really well, because you've got that kind of you know, getting children to take turns a bit more. So there are so many strategies that we really like it, and we're looking to sort of just embed it really now, and also link it to the curriculum, because we have done a lot of work on our curriculum, as all schools do, and thinking about how we can really use this to kind of as a vehicle for developing all the AOLEs really. It's not just about English, and I think that's really important. Thank you.
Oh, diolch, Helen and Joe. That was great again. Thank you ever so much. Again, just so much packed into such a small presentation, but you can tell that such a big body of work has gone on to get to that point. I just wanted to circle back to something that you brought up right at the beginning there, which is just how you've really focused on the explicit teaching of the skills required for good oracy, rather than just sort of merely providing opportunities for them to talk. Actually, you know, structuring and giving the sentence stems and thinking about the different types of talk, and how your learners, who as you identified as being very articulate and confident and intelligent anyway, how we can really sort of hone that to make them really successful orators. So I found that really interesting. Thank you ever so much.
Can I put in an extra comment there? Just one of the things that, in terms of the resources from Voice 21, that we found most useful are the videos. So when you show the children a video, it's so powerful. And so if as much as we could get of videos is so helpful. So if Voice 21 you know, we're going to try and use as many as we can, but they are such a great resource. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And we've got Hannah, our school liaison officer from Voice 21 on the call. So I'm sure she can perhaps make a note, more videos would be great. But yeah, you're right. There's nothing like modelling it, is there, for learners? And I've been in classrooms where teachers and TAs have modelled a discussion or a conversation for the pupils to watch, and sort of using your own pupil models as well, and building up a bank over time as well of recording your own pupils and then using those videos to show perhaps younger year groups or different cohorts. I agree. Hannah, did you have anything you wanted to say? I saw you appear then on camera.
Oh, I was just going to say that, yeah, everything's been so interesting to hear, and I'll make sure that's fed back, because yeah, we want more videos, and it's good to feedback from schools, because it then releases budgets and things like that, so we can get people out and about into the field to do more of them, because I agree they're so valuable. So yeah, it was wonderful to hear both those presentations, so thank you.
Oh, I agree. Thank you, Hannah. I think what we'll do is we just have a quick pause here. If anyone has got any questions for any of our schools, any of our presenters, if you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask. I know networking virtually is not as easy as it is in person. But if if you did have any comments or questions, please do feel free to unmute yourself, or if you wanted to type it in the chat, I'm happy to kind of field any questions. I'll just give 2 minutes. I'll just see if any pop up in the chat, because it's always nice in the networking meetings to kind of get a bit of a conversation going, especially when it's a network meeting about Oracy.
Hi, sorry, this isn't so much a question, just sort of going back to Grangetown. And I noticed that on each of the slides, when they were doing activities, they had the constant repetition of the symbols, of the Voice 21 symbols. And I just really like that. I think it's simple, isn't it? But it's really sort of making sure that the children understand what it is. And I would expect it almost, the sort of final point you would want them to be at is just to see that and know, I go into my pair now, I go into my 6 now, rather than teacher having to waste sort of time explaining. So now I'd like you to do da, da, and da, you know, so it's just that constant repetition of those as well, teaching the children, well, when we see this is what's expected of us. So it's sort of, I suppose, like teaching the sentence stems, isn't it? But there's that visual relating it to what's expected of them as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Grangetown, if you're still here, have you seen any sort of impact over time from including those symbols?
I think it's just made our children more aware of, like, when we're teaching, okay, well now it's like, particularly if we've got things like a nest, right, so now it's thinking time on your own, and it's just that constant reminder, right, so now there's a different type of talk, so there's a different purpose for stuff, and I think they've been more aware of that.
Yeah. I think it's good for us as well, because I know for me, it reminds me that I need to be really explicit now about the type of Oracy we're focusing on. So it's like a little prompt for me as well, really, to make sure that I think about that, because I plan to do it, but just sort of to remind me to be explicit as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really useful. It's just these little tips, isn't it? These little classroom strategies that can really help to kind of, I think, embed the processes and the strategies and get to that point where, you know, as was said, the pupils can perhaps just see the icon and know what is expected, and then perhaps over time even the icon would be able to disappear and they would still know what those expectations for talk are.